Ladies and gentlemen, wish you all a very pleasant day. As part of the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction, it is an honor and privilege for me to welcome you to this technical session called 3A, Team Disaster Risk Reduction. This technical session will be looking at a wide range of aspects related to disaster risk reduction, from technology to social aspects, which are of paramount importance in achieving the globally set priorities for actions for disaster risk reduction. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today, co-chairing this technical session. Along with me, Dr. Saranga Vithanagi from the Disaster Management Center, Sri Lanka, will also be co-chairing this session. I'm Roshani Palliguru. I'm presently based in Sri Lanka, working for the University of Vocational Technology as a senior lecturer in quantity surveying. I do have an enormous interest in conducting and delivering research in the area of disaster resilience building with a particular focus on the built environment. Hereby, please let me kindly invite Dr. Saranga Vithanagi to tell us a few words about herself, being the other co-chair of this session. Over to you, Dr. Saranga.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Roshani. I am Dr. Saranga Vithanage, Assistant Director of Training and Education and working in more than 8 hours in this years in Disaster Management Center. And I have an interest in field of information application of disaster risk management.
Thank you, Dr. Saranga, for the introduction. Before we move on to the presentation, we got several announcements to be made. We got actually 6 presentations as per the schedule, but it seems only 4 presenters have joined the session, this particular technical session. So I believe all those 4 presenters are with us within the session now. Their pre-recorded presentations will be played by the technical support team, where each presentation will be of 10 minutes long. In the end of each presentation, the audience will be allowed to raise their questions with the relevant presenter, either verbally or by directing your questions via the chat function. We anticipate a good support and an engagement from the audience to make this session more successful. Without taking much time, let me quickly introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Mr. Bandula Wickramaratchi from Asian Disaster Preparedness Center in Thailand, and he is a former secretary to the Ministry of Primary Industries. The title of Mr. Bandula Wickramaratchi's presentation is Analysis of Shoreline Dynamics in Spatial and Temporal Skills at Kalpitia Coastal Window, Sri Lanka, an approach for informed decision-making for sustainable coastal administration. It's over to you now, Mr. Bandula.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to present our study on analysis of shoreline dynamics in spatial and temporal scales at Kalpitia Coastal Windows, which is northwestern part of Sri Lanka. This is an approach for informed decision making for sustainable coastal administration. If we look at the background of the study, as you can see here, the coastal regions are dynamic both in spatial and temporal domains due to natural and anthropogenic drivers. The changes here happen due to the coastal protection structures in place for protecting the coastal communities. As an island nation, coastal zones are significant, economically significant. And also it has been found that GDP of the coastal region was 44% of the national GDP. And also high economic densities lies along the western coastal region. The coastal economies are built on coastal natural capital that includes landscape formed by marine and terrestrial forces. Rivers drain and nourish the coast with sediment released from the central hills, and also lagoons that provide ecosystem services, a variety of habitats, sandy beaches, sand spit dunes, rocky shores, mangrove colonies, salt marshes, etc. And key economic sectors, fisheries, tourism, and other livelihoods depends on the productivity of those diverse habitats. You might know that coastal areas consist of varied natural elements, exclusively interact with complex relationships. The phenomenon determine the health of the coastal ecosystem, which provide ecosystem services for the human well-being. However, the human presence in multiple sectors with competitive economic agendas increasingly consume coastal resources, even exceeding the capacities of the resources, and also some of them are irreversible. Hence, it is important to explore the dynamics scientifically in both spatial and temporal scales, supporting the informed decision making for adaptive coastal governance. If we move into the analysis that we have done in these areas, coastal sediment process is a key element of the complex system that indicate the dynamic of ecosystem at its first mind. As the study was focused on the coastal sediment dynamics as an indicator of the ecosystem health. In this study, we did a lot of field work such as measurement, longshore profiles, cross-shore profiles, bathymetric surveys, and also we collected 100 sand samples from Kalutara to Kalpitia. And since we utilized satellite images, we had to ground verifications and also land cover land use verifications. And also we look at the structural interventions in the area. And sometimes we did the shoreline imaging with outdoor cameras. In the analysis of shoreline dynamics, we used the approach of nested spatial grids. The entire West Coast was considered at macro scale and then forced into the Kalpitia coastal window for detailing the micro scale and meso scale dynamics. First, we analyzed the sediment drift along the west coast using the thermoluminescence intensities of sand particles. For that purpose, we have tested sand samples at the laboratory in Tokyo University. And it is a phenomenon that while the sand particles are buried under soil, it will accumulate some energy, and once it is exposed to sunlight, the energies will decay. So it shows how long it has been exposed to the sunlight, so we can determine with the decaying intensities, we can determine how it moves along the beaches. When we plot the intensities, you can see here the highest peak shows near Kalu River, and the second peak, Kalani River, and there's a small peak in front of the Deduru River. Those shows the fresh sand supply from the land, and also it shows that continuous decay from Kalutara to Kalpitia. That shows the sand particles moves along the beach northward. This is the first time that proves this phenomenon scientifically in Sri Lanka. Then we detail the dynamics in the Kalpitia coastal region in a nested spatial scales. Then entire Kalpitia coastal region divided into micro scale cells and analyzed in detail. In analyzing the shoreline dynamics, we use different type of satellite imageries. The first we found aerial photographs captured in 1956 in Sri Lanka, and then subsequently we found Landsat data, Google Earth, and ALOS satellite imageries. As you can see here, we found that in Kalpitia area there had been huge accumulation at a rate of 15 acres per year. Within last 50 years, we found that 475 acres has been added to the mainland. While we found huge accumulation in Kandakuli area, we found that there's a huge erosion in Kudava area. At the maximum point, the shoreline has been shifted 600 meters due to coastal erosion. Again, in the Vellai area, we found that huge changes in the coastal islets. The islets has been moved toward mainland about 1.5 kilometers within last 50 years. In a fine analysis in Kudav area, we detected 300-meter deterioration within 10 months. But we couldn't detail such changes due to the temporal scale of satellite images. And we had to erect a tower and capture the images using outdoor camera. We captured images at 1.2 second interval, but within the 6-month period at that monsoon, there had not been any kind of such change. Within the project period, we used different kind of satellite imageries captured from airborne planes and also satellite imageries and the outdoor cameras. In conclusion, the main livelihood of the communities in the area is fisheries, but the fisheries facilities are hindered by the new formation. So they had to face a lot of issues. The authorities used those information and try to formulate solution for them. The area was proposed for tourism development, but knowing the fact some of the projects were scaled down. Even on Vellai Island, there was a proposal to develop the Vellai Island as tourism resort, but knowing the fact that they have withdrawn the project proposals. We have detected few developments on the newly accreted lands, and for development approval, they have produced fake land titles, deeds. Further information was passed to the relevant authorities for taking decisions on coastal defense activities and designing suitable coastal protection measures. Acknowledge support given by Department of Coast Conservation and also the Coastal Engineering Laboratory at Tokyo University. Geographic information sent at AIT Thailand, and the satellite imageries were provided by JAXA, and the study was done in collaboration with the Open University. Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting presentation, Mr. Mandala Wickramarachchi. Are there any questions from the audience to Mr. Mandala? I haven't received any in the chat function. Is there anyone willing to or interested in raising a question with Mr. Mandala? If not, I'll ask a question from Mr. Wickramarachchi. I just wonder whether you have any idea about the novel solutions you can propose to combat the human-related drivers that cause dynamics in coastal ecosystems. If that is the case, what would be the role of the general public in dealing with these kind of novel solutions?
Yeah, actually, I have studied about this sediment supply and the sediment drift along the coast, because it's an indicator of the entire coastal ecosystem, health of the entire coastal ecosystem. So as we found that even the Kalpitia Peninsula has been accumulated within last 10,000 years. So that is how it is indicate the ecosystem health. I mean, even the Puttalam Lagoon has been created within 10,000 years. So that phenomenon. So with the current situation, because we are mining huge amount of sand from our rivers, so we don't get enough sand to the beaches, because normally naturally rivers nourish the beaches. So in that situation, we have to control a lot of sand mining in activities within the rivers. For that purpose, we cannot regulate them, but we cannot regulate, but better better have a culture with low sand culture, because even nowadays we are having boundary walls around our houses. So why don't we have boundary walls instead of live fences or live walls? Even in our history, we had a lot of live walls. Such as we have to have such low sand culture. That is my main aim. Like even when I was in coast conservation department, we started the promoting low sand culture. Even the walls within the houses, we can just have wallpapers instead of plastering. Likewise, we have to use that kind of approaches instead of moving to the enforcements.
Of course, I think the construction industry has a significant role to play in this regard in minimizing the use of sand, isn't it? Especially the construction industry. And Sri Lanka being an island country, this is a very hot topic. I think people should carry out a lot of research in this regard in the future as well. And are there any questions from Dr. Saranga, our co-chair, to Mr. Bandula?
Yes, Dr. Rashani. I have one question from the Mr. Bandula. And this is very interesting presentation. And I would like to know about, is there any uniqueness of this Kalpitiya lagoons area?
Actually, there is as I understood, this is the most sensitive area in the country when we consider the sediment supplies. Because in very soon we will lose Vellai Island, and also above that we have another island. So those islands, I don't think those will be there for more than 30-40 years. So because of less sand supply from the southern part, mainly from Kalu River and also Kalani River, then there is no sand supply. Even there are a lot of blockage in between due to new construction. So with that, we will face a lot of issues. Even on the coastal line, even just above Colombo, Usatakeya area, there are some sand dunes, but they are facing a lot of issues because of we don't have enough sand supplies from the river. So for that, as I said, yes, even entire country facing this problem. Nowadays, we are mining sand from the eastern part. Even those sand mining happen from the historical deposit. Those will not replenish within 30-40 years. Even it takes another 1,000 years if we get enough sand from the hill country. So we have to stop, actually reduce the sand mining, because we cannot stop. Even we extract sand from the sea now, but even in the sea those are limited, because even the in sea bottom we have sand deposit just in front of the rivers. Those have been deposited for a longer period than 10,000 years. Those sand have been deposited. If we don't get any sand from rivers out now to the river basin, once we get those on, the replenishment will be very slow. So we have to think about that.
Okay, Mr. Bandula, actually it's very important and very interesting for the coastal geomorphology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bandula. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next presentation. Actually, our second presenter is missing, I think. So we are going to move on to the third presentation. The third presentation in the sense, Ms. Maheshwari Alapatha from Sabaragama University, Sri Lanka. Her research title is Natural versus Man-made Disasters, Impact of Disasters on Smallholder Agriculture Systems in Gem Mining Areas of Sri Lanka. It's over to you, Ms. Maheshwari.
Natural versus man-made disasters, impact of disasters on smallholder agriculture systems in gem mining areas of Sri Lanka. I am Maheshwari Alapatha. Introduction. Disaster is defined as a destructive event relative to resources available and make casualties which cause an impact to the society for a short period of time. Disasters could be classified as natural, man-made, and hybrid. Natural versus man-made disasters are frequent incidents which devastate the livelihood of the gem miners. Disasters are aggravated by the human activities and operations which disturb the natural balance of the ecosystem. Thus, the poorest and economically and socially vulnerable farmers were the ones who were at risk. Therefore, it is timely and important to identify and record the actual impact of these disasters, both natural and man-made, on the smallholder agriculture systems in overexploited gem mining areas in Sri Lanka. Let's move to the research objectives. My objectives are to identify the natural disasters and man-made disasters in the study area, to identify the impact of natural disasters on smallholder agriculture system, to identify the impact of man-made disasters on the smallholder agriculture system, to identify the barriers to minimize the impact of man-made disasters on smallholder agricultural. The conceptual framework of my study is to investigate the impact of both natural and man-made disasters on livelihood assets, including social assets, physical assets, financial assets, human assets, and natural assets of the smallholder artisanal agriculture systems in gem mining area. Methodology. The study was carried out in Alapatha DS division of Ratnapura district, which is an area highly vulnerable to disasters and also an area badly affected by excessive gem and sand mining. 3 GN divisions of Alapatha DS division, including Alapatha, Pallagedera, and Dellabada, were selected. So the sample and the sampling technique. 100 farmers were selected to collect data, and it was done through convenience sampling. A focus group discussion was also conducted with 20 farmers, and in-depth interviews were done. Primary data was through survey strategy, focus group discussion, and in-depth interviews. Secondary data from the Department of Agriculture, the National Gem and Jewellery Authority, and the Ministry of Disaster Management. Data analysis. Qualitative and quantitative data were collected. Descriptive statistics, social mapping, institutional analysis, maps of occupational and seasonal trends, land use maps of the area. Let's move to the results and discussion of the study. So this is the sample profile, which I would like to highlight the mean income level of the farmers, which is 73% of Alapatha and 64% of Pallagedera and 75% of Dellabada are the farmers who receive an income less than 20,000 Sri Lankan rupees, so which is below the official poverty line of the country. So this is the land use map. The main crops identified within the study area were tea, rubber, and paddy, and the red dots indicate the gem and the sand mining pits within the study area. Our first objective was to identify the disasters within the study area. Therefore, with the help of the focus group discussion, we were able to develop a timeline for the natural disasters in the study area from 2001 to 2019. So the major natural disasters identified within the area was landslides and floods. So in certain areas, there were certain years there were major floods, and in certain years there were minor floods and flash floods. Notably, in 2018, the study area experienced a drought condition. Then we also inquired about the natural disasters happening within the study area from the farmers. The farmers revealed that frequent landslides and frequent floods were common in the area. In average, 95% and 70% and 81% of the people out of the total population of Pallagedera, Dellabada, and Alapatha were affected due to the recent major floods. The man-made disasters. The farmers revealed that the excessive involvement of plantation, mainly tea, and also mining, both artisanal and mechanized gem and sand mining in the rivers, are the main precursors of the man-made disasters. So this shows the annual events, the onset and the offset of the season. Usually, the Yala season is from September to March, and the Maha season from May to August. And the sand mining season within the area was from October to April, and the gem mining season was from December to June. So this shows that gem mining and sand mining was frequently happening throughout the year. Then let's move to the impact of the natural disasters on smallholder agriculture system. So this data shows the population affected, the household affected through the natural disasters. These natural disasters had made the lives of the farmers in a vulnerable situation and exposing them to numerous risks, from constant displacement and relocation, disruption of education of the children, the health risk, the psychological risk, and the protection issues. So this shows the cost of maintenance of the displaced person, where we were able to calculate the cost incurred on cooked food and dry. And the impact on the children's education, the number of school days missed by the children within the study area, which was an average of 4 weeks per year. And in order to identify the impact on the economic assets, we saw that the major economic consequences of natural disasters are due to the loss of income due to the impact caused on agriculture production. So there was a reduction of the paddy yield and also loss of employment, which was average of 4 years per year. And also the impact on the physical assets, we were able to identify the number of damaged houses and the number of damaged roads within the study area. Then let's move to the impact of the man-made disasters on the smallholder agricultural system, the income from the economic assets. So this shows that from 2010 to 2018, the number of mines have drastically increased, and the farmers were aware. Around 63% of the farmers were aware that the mining activities have negatively affected the smallholder agriculture system. And we also inquired the farmers about whether the agriculture production was decreased due to mining in the recent 10 years. So 62% of the farmers and 68% of the farmers perceived that both paddy and tea yield had respectively reduced during the recent 10 years due to the negative implication of gem and sand mining. And also the focus group discussions revealed that 90% of the farmers are victims of microcredit due to mismanagement of money, and they have used their fixed assets of gold and jewelry as security on pawning. This has pushed the farmers below the poverty line. The mining activities that affect the smallholder agriculture system are clearance of land, deep pits, use of machines to pump drink water, mechanized mining, and abundant. The impact on the social assets. So the breeding sites of disease-causing vectors have increased, cracking of walls of the houses and other man-made structures, occupational health hazards encountered in mining, and farmers migrating to gem mining. And also the impact on human assets. These selected GN divisions were traditionally agricultural villages. However, the registered farmers out of the total population of Pallagada, Delabada, and Alapatha divisions count 4%, 15%, and 50% respectively, emphasizing that the likelihood of the people for farming is limited to a stage. And the impact on the water quality, drying of springs and the groundwater contamination was common. And the impact on the land use quality, reduction of the irrigation efficiency, soil disturbance, reducing the soil fertility and soil erosion, and removing the top. So these are some of the pictures of how it has affected the natural assets. And finally, to identify the barriers to minimize the impact of the man-made disasters on smallholder agriculture system. So these were the barriers: influence of gem mine owners, corruption in law enforcement agencies, minimum suppression on mining, license holders neglecting the license rules, and illegal mining. So to move to the conclusion, that is, the study area is prone to both natural and man-made disasters. The most common natural disasters were flood and landslides, and man-made disasters included excessive artisanal and commercial gem mining and sand mining. Both natural and man-made disasters have made the farmers at a greater risk of falling into poverty, and which also conflict with the local population's agricultural livelihood activities, and the social, human, financial, physical, and natural assets were severely affected. And the study identified the bureaucratic issues act as brakes to minimize the detrimental man-made activities. So finally, moving to recommendation, comprehensive policies should be drawn. Financing and concrete actions are needed to support the farmers, and rural economic empowerment and training for skill development, training on financial literacy and management, novel farming system models by introducing village-level food banks to supply and preserve raw food supply, sustainable use and management of vital resources. Farmers should be made aware about the importance of the natural assets, and continuous monitoring of the mining operation has to be ensured throughout the institution. So these are the references. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maheshwari, for the presentation. Are there any questions for Ms. Maheshwari from the audience? You can either switch on your microphone and raise your question verbally, or else you can post your question in the chat box. Okay, then I have a question for Ms. Maheshwari. Actually, Maheshwari, you talked about both natural and man-made disasters, the impact on both types of disasters on this agricultural sector in this particular area, Ratnapura area. So, considering both man-made and natural disasters, which type of disaster has been the most significant? Which type of disaster has created the highest impact on the agricultural, smallholder agriculture sector in this Ratnapura area where you have carried out your research?
Yes, it's difficult to encounter to tell you which has impacted most highestly, but both natural and man-made are both occurring at the same time, and the natural disasters have been aggravated by the man-made disasters, because Ratnapura was usually an area in Sabargamu area which experience lot of rain commonly, so usually we get floods. But basically, with the with these mining activities, it has aggravated these floods to occur in higher numbers now. So the occurrence is higher. So in these recent years, with the man-made disasters, had just aggravated the natural disasters.
Okay, thank you, Maheshwari, for the answer. And as you mentioned about the mining industry, I got a little question with regard to that as well. Have you looked into the mining industry in particular? What kind of illegal or like bad practices that have created these kind of man-made, what has actually helped on man-made disasters, causing man-made disasters? And if that is the case, what kind of changes are required in the mining industry to minimize these kind of hazards in the future and the vulnerabilities caused by that particular industry? Have you looked into that side at all within your research?
Yes, actually, ma'am, there's a lot of illegal mining happening within these areas. And also when it comes to legal mining, now there's a particular process that we have to go through when we are applying a license to get a legal mine. So it's combined with the National Gem and Jewellery Authority plus the Agrarian Service Center. So they have a kind of rule, like now if they're going to mine in a particular paddy field, you can operate only 2 mines in the paddy field, and it has to be limited for only 20 perches of the paddy land, and the rest has to be cultivated. But usually, even in the legal mining, the license holder try to ignore this, and they try to do mining possibly within the whole land itself, though we are confined only to do it in 20 perches. So this has to be monitored well by the National Gem and Jewellery Authority, and also because they usually send government agents to look into this, but sometimes with bribery and all those stuff, this has been neglected. So this is one main issue. And the other thing is there's a lot of illegal mining happening where we don't have records. So this has just aggravated the natural disasters within the area, and also had impacted the livelihood of the farmers within the area.
Okay, which means even those things which have been classified as legal mining, they also have certain illegal aspects in operation, isn't it?
Yes.
So on top of that, there are a lot of illegal mining things happening in and around the area, which need some further research on this, isn't it? Okay, thank you, Maheshwari, for that. Dr. Saranga, do you have any questions for Maheshwari?
No question from her.
Dr. Saranga?
Yes, there is no questions here.
You don't have any question. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Maheshwari. Then we will then move on to the next presentation, our third presentation. Our third presenter will be Dr. Chaturangani Jayapudi from University of Huddersfield in the UK. The title of her presentation is Built Environment Perspective of Post-Disaster and Conflict-Induced Displacement. It's over to you now, Chaturangani.
Hello everyone, my name is Chaturangani Jayapudi. I'm a researcher attached to Global Disaster Resilience Centre, University of Huddersfield, UK. So the topic I'm going to discuss here today is the role of the built environment in rebuilding displaced and host community. I have structured this presentation into 4 main areas: research context, background explaining the research problem, then methodology and the findings of this research study. So the research context. The work I'm going to present here today is based on the REGARD project, which stands for Rebuilding After Displacement. This is an Erasmus Plus strategic partnership project. The project consortium consists of 5 different members in 5 different universities in 4 different countries. So the central focus of this research is on the displacement due to the disasters and conflict. I always like to use this picture to describe. Imagine when the people get displaced like this, as shown in this picture. What would they need? They would definitely, at the initial stage, they will need food, water, sanitary facilities, all the basic necessities. But apart from that, eventually they will need new houses if they have lost the previous place. Then after that, there will be a series of community needs. So we started this research study from this point. We identified series of needs and then we categorized them into 7 broader categories as shown in this box. Then apart from identifying these community needs, there's another important area we explored, is the social cohesion. Why social cohesion is so much important in the displacement context? It's because what happens is when the displaced communities arrive to a new location, initially the host community have an empathy towards the displaced community. Therefore, the initial relationship is positive. But what happens is, with the time, this relationship gets broken due to various reasons. It can be due to the extreme pressure on the existing services and facilities. Like that, this relationship gets broken. Because of that, this built environment can play an extra role by to create or enhance this social cohesion. So exploring these 2 areas, we investigated the role of the built environment in rebuilding communities and enhancing the social cohesion between the displaced and the host. Here, the rebuilding communities means to address these community needs and also the long-term satisfaction of these communities, both displaced and host. So how we answered this research question or the research area? This is the methodological framework we used. We first reviewed the existing literature, country-specific literature in 4 different contexts: UK, Sweden, Estonia, and Sri Lanka. And then we did a global literature review. And then we developed a conceptual framework based on the literature. Then we assessed this framework through the data collection and analysis. We collected data using purposive sampling. We used 2 platforms, in-depth interview and then focus group discussions with the communities in Sri Lanka. In-depth interviews were conducted with the officials who work in the resettlement planning process, and then the community representative organizations, and then government bodies, relevant government bodies, and the non-governmental organizations. The focus group discussion is specifically with the community in Sri Lanka, covering both conflict-induced displaced communities and disaster-induced displaced communities. Then we analyzed all these data using the Do No Harm framework, and then this developed framework was validated through the use of virtual focus group discussion with 26 experts in the globe. Then we developed the final framework. So the final framework looks something like this. what is important here is the role of the built environment goes beyond addressing the physical needs of the communities. The built environment can play an instrumental role by acting across 6 perspectives by constructing physical assets, obviously, then after that, by facilitating institutional assets, developing human capital, by nurturing social assets, by stimulating economic assets and protecting natural assets. So I will go one by one now. The physical assets. This is the most popular role of the built environment. Here the physical asset means 3 main areas: basic services and facilities, and then public places and play areas, then housing, 3 main areas. So the adequate provision of basic services and infrastructure facilities, really important factor, not only to address the community needs, but also for the social cohesion. Here the basic services and infrastructure facilities, water, electricity, public transportation, all the basic services and infrastructure facilities. Adequate provision is important for the social cohesion. It's because lack of provision can create social tension between the displaced and host communities. And then provision of public places and play areas to ensure the well-being. Here, well-being means both physical well-being and the mental well-being. It's because once people are forced to flee from their home, they are mentally sometimes devastated. So taking care of their mental well-being is really important. Then covering the housing aspect, there are 4 sub-factors are identified. Standard and quality of housing with physical and climate resilience features, location of housing matched with socio-cultural, economic needs and the land use pattern of the area, and then size, layout and design of housing need to be matched with socio-cultural and economic needs. It's because the family size is different from one family to another. Demographic composition within the family may be different from one to another. And then there may be various cultural behaviors, economic and livelihood needs. So according to these needs, the size, layout and design need to be matched. Then adequate initial temporary housing and allocated time period to move from temporary housing to permanent housing. The second role of built environment is stimulating the economic asset, access to previous livelihood or place where the land or place is attached to livelihood is very important. Then ensure the economic stability of communities with special needs also need to be considered. Then access to affordable housing. Housing is considered in terms of the standard and quality under the physical asset. There it is considered under affordability. And then create economic opportunities aiming the financial independence. What happens is once the displaced communities arrive to a new area, or once they get displaced, they get loads of financial aid. Because of that, sometimes some displaced communities try to rely on these financial aids. So in terms of that, how to create economic opportunities aiming the financial independence is also an important factor. Then developing human capital provisions to gain employability skills and to match the professional qualifications, provide orientation related to local integration, and provide awareness on cultural differences to the professionals and stakeholders who are working with the displaced community. This is also another important factor we identify, because lack of awareness on cultural differences can create lots of problems with the service provision. And then adequate equal and adequate access to education. Here primary, secondary and tertiary education is considered. Then the other type of role of the built environment is nurturing the social asset. Easy access to social services and support, social equity in housing provision, social integration through built environment, then increase the sense of belonging and attachment to the community through the improvements of the local characteristics of building or through the neighborhood characteristics. Then relocation to suitable and welcoming neighborhoods also important. Easy access to emotional support and mental health care. Then institutional asset, provision of improved support and services aimed at local integration, and then provision of adequate time, resources, information, and technical guidance for the local authorities or other implementation. Maximizes stakeholder engagement in the settlement planning, including displaced and host communities, and also host local government. Improve government strategies and enhance legal and policy framework, also important. Last role but not least, role of built environment is to protect natural asset. Here, protect and provide access to green space and natural resources. Here the access means both physical access and also the visual access, because in terms of the mental well-being of displaced communities, access to it is found that access to natural daylight and natural view is really important. In avoiding resettling, environmentally sensitive and hazard-prone areas are the two sub-factors identified. So in summary, this is the final framework again. Here, the point we would like to highlight here is the role of the built environment goes beyond addressing the physical needs of the displaced communities. It can play an extra role by developing the human capital and by developing economic assets, livelihoods, and social assets, natural assets, and institutional assets, and also in enhancing the social cohesion. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation, Chaturangani. Are there any questions for Dr. Chaturangani from the audience? Then I'll ask a question, Chaturangani. The needs of the two types of communities, conflict-induced, displaced by conflict due to conflicts, and displaced due to natural disasters. Those two categories of people, their needs can vary depending upon the context, especially the country, the geographical factors, ethnicities, religion backgrounds, etc., etc. So how and to what extent you have taken these things into account when you develop your final framework, Chaturangani?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Roshani, for the interesting question. Yes, actually here, displacement can cause into due to four main factors: development-induced, and disaster-induced, and this conflict-induced, and environmentally induced problems. So we have the needs due to the environmentally induced and development induced are very much different from conflicts and disaster induced, because it happens suddenly. So that's why we have scoped down to conflict-induced and disaster-induced displacements. Actually, their needs are somewhat similar compared to the development-induced and the environmentally induced. So then we have broadly considered all these needs and categorized them into 7 broad categories, covering both conflict-induced and disaster-induced. So we have actually considered this aspect in our research and scoped down it.
Okay, thank you, Chaturangani. I got another question. So what are the built environment professionals actually you have considered, taken into account within your research? If you can name a few of them, what are the professions that you have considered within your research when you say built environment professionals?
Yes, actually, within the project team, we have different contexts in Sweden, UK, Sri Lanka. So the built environment professionals, when we try to define, it was really difficult, because built environment professionals in Sweden context is completely different from UK and Sri Lankan context. So as a whole, we considered whoever the professionals who are linked to the urban planning, urban design, and resettlement planning process. So apart from that, we had to consider even the stakeholders related to the resettlement process, including all the non-governmental organizations and community representative organizations. So it was really difficult to define actually, but we have managed covering all the context.
Yeah, and as you said before, actually there must be a clear difference between how the disaster-induced displacement and conflict-induced displacement in terms of how they affect those two types of displacement, how they affect the rebuilding process. I hope that you have considered those differences, and depending upon that, the type of competencies that you are going to maybe introduce, or like you're going to improve, that you are going to do something with regard to the built environment professional competencies. You have done your research has gone into that angle as well, and have focused on that, because depending on the two types of differences between the two categories, the type of competencies may also vary, isn't it? The competency
Yes,
requirements of the built environment professionals.
that's
I
very
hope you have
true,
considered.
Dr.
Yeah.
Yes, because now at the moment we are in the stage of identifying this competency framework, and we have to categorize them into three broader tiers because of these differences. So yeah, we have actually considered it.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
And,
with the
yeah.
findings, I'll be able to present in a future conference.
So you're going to take these findings to the higher levels as well, policy level, maybe built environment professional organizations as well, isn't it? That is
Yes,
your
that's
plan
true.
as part of the project. Okay, thank you very much, Dr.
Thank
Chatrangani.
you.
Dr. Saranga, do you have any questions for her?
Yes, Dr. Rashani, I have one question. And we are also interesting about this presentation, because it's also very much important for the Sri Lanka. And Dr. Chatrangani, do you study about, because you can find the example from both sector, from the conflict-induced and the disaster-induced resettlement activities in Sri Lanka. And for your study, do you study about some areas in Sri Lanka?
Yes, actually, we have taken 3 case studies covering both conflict-induced and disaster-induced. For the disaster-induced displacement, we took Aranayaka. And then for the conflict-induced, we took Bharatipuram and Malayalampuram in Kilinochchi district for the conflict-induced displacement.
Okay. I think we hope for your findings, and actually it's also important, and it is good eye-opening for the disaster resettlement and rebuilding in Sri Lanka also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chatrangani. This is an interesting research. Hope you will come up with a lot of good outcomes that can be shared within the Sri Lankan communities as well as with other countries as well. Thank you very much for that. With that, we will move on to the next presentation. That is going to be our final presentation, because we are going to have only 4 presentations within this session today. Our final presenter is Mr. Sampath Kukulevitana. He is from Disaster Management Center, Sri Lanka. The title of his presentation is Assessment of Existing Disaster Resources Information and Design Interactive Resources Network for Effective Disaster Management. And according to Sampath, this is actually a part of his master's research. It is over to you now, Sampath.
Hi, I'm Sampath Kukulevitana from Sri Lanka. My paper is on assessment of disaster resource information and design interactive resource network for effective disaster management. These are the contents I am going to share with you. Disasters and resource management, literatures which have been followed, research problem and the research objectives, the scope of this assessment, methodology and the limitations. So, exposure of both natural and man-made disasters are increasing due to the growth of population and the infrastructure, and it causing massive destruction of the economy of the world. According to the World Bank Global Risk Analysis Report released on March 2016, more than 160 countries have more than a quarter of their population in areas of high mortality risk from one or more natural disasters. These disasters include droughts, tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, floods, and landslides. So all the countries are suffering before, during, and after disasters to mobilize the needed resources to save the life of victims and provide the basic service. Apart from that, more time consuming to mobilize the resources to the disaster affected area to bring the situation back to normal. In Sri Lankan context, during 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Sri Lanka did not have proper institutional arrangement to manage disasters and save life of people. So we lost more than 30,000 people. After the tsunami, the government of Sri Lanka passed its Disaster Management Act 2005 number 13 and established Disaster Management Center under the National Disaster Management Council to coordinate with international and national organizations to effectively respond to disasters. One of the key responsibilities of DMC is providing instructions and guidelines to the stakeholders to mobilize the resources before, during, and after disasters. As per the need, DMC developed database SLDR and Sri Lanka Disaster Resource Network and collect the number of information to support the disaster response. In last decades, Sri Lanka faced unexpected floods and landslide situations. As per the Disaster Management Center officials, it's difficult to manage such a situation due to the lack of information on these basic resources. Even DMC has all the information in SLDRN. So these are the literatures which I have been followed. So as I discussed in this literature survey, a number of methods have been reported internationally to identify and utilizing their resources. In case of limited number of resources, the resources scheduling is very much necessary. In Sri Lankan context, there is a need for developing methods to identify the resources, needs, and scheduling of resources by considering various objectives and criteria. Unfortunately, there is insufficient observed data to support these conditions, especially from perspective of Sri Lankan context. The current paper is aimed to fill this gap and taking into account the importance of resource managing in disaster management and propose interactive resource network for effective disaster management in Sri Lanka. So my research problem is whether available disaster resource information system is useful for effective disaster resource response in Sri Lanka. Under that, research questions are whether government has identified potential resources during the disaster planning process. What are the gaps between resource requirement and its distribution? And whether resource providers have assessed accurately in terms of their capacities, availabilities, and the durabilities. The objective of this study is to review the present disaster resource information system and upgrade it to a friendly manner with concern of resource providers to mobilize their needed resources during the major disaster. This study focuses to categorize the resources which is needed during the disaster and collect the information from the service provider by aware them what action they want to do in case they have to select it to do something at the time of disasters. So under that, these specific objectives are coming to identify the gaps between resource requirement and its distribution, to identify the dedicated resources such as DMC or any other government organization provided, to develop the TOR to utilize the resources during the disasters, and provide the suggestions to strengthen the capacity of Disaster Management Center and National Disaster Relief Service Center. Following are the broad set of activities that were included in this assessment. Review the existing documentation and interactions and discussions with the relevant officers. And the Valalavite DSD which is located in Kalutra district, mostly vulnerable in floods and landslide, selected as a pilot project area. So when we are discussing about the methodology, this study will be focused on management of resources which can be utilized disasters. A need assessment should be conducted to determine what type of resources required for disaster with the guidance of disaster management practitioners. Besides identifying specific resources for the response preparedness, the need assessment should be categorized the type, ownership, availability, capacity, capability, functionality, quantity, and the liability associated with the resources. So these primary data will be collected from Disaster Management Center and the community level through the volunteer contribution. Data will be collected through Android-based mobile application developed using ArcGIS, and the collected data will be re-validated with the DMC officials and analyzed using ArcGIS server and display in Emergency Operations Center in Disaster Management Center. So this is the need assessment which I have questioned through the volunteers and the community level peoples. In here, I have explained about the resources type, equipment, facilities, vehicles, teams, personnel, supplies, and other resources. In here, I also show the resources which are coming internal, that means DMC or District Disaster Management Center coordination units owned or managed, and also external resources which belongs to the other stakeholders. So this is how I collect the data, and this is the data collection app developed using ArcGIS. So this is the final result. It shows as an interactive web app. When the person click on the symbol, it shows the every details which we have been entered earlier. So limitations is basically ArcGIS license cost. It's a very huge cost, and the smartphone literacy of village level community leaders, and the most field officers willing to take allowance for filling this smartphone form. And also the important thing is data must be updated once in a 6 month. Thank you very much. This is time for questions.
Thank you, Sampath, for the interesting presentation. Are there any questions for Sampath from the audience? Okay, let me ask a quick question, Sampath. So you have already completed this research, isn't it?
Yeah, actually for the Valalavita DS division, I have completed it.
Okay, but still you got some things to cover.
Yeah, actually,
things to cover, no?
I have done it as a pilot project. So still those results are not used in Disaster Management Center, Emergency Operations Center. So I try to develop this thing as a 2 levels. For the one is for the national level, and other one is for the local level. So the limitation is that,
two applications.
Yeah.
You are going to develop two applications,
yeah.
isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say within your research, you used the word resources. When you referred to resources, it wasn't only about information, isn't it?
Yeah.
You were talking about other types of resources as well, like in one of the slides, you had a list of various resources, equipment and all, isn't it?
Yeah, madam. Basically, for example, tractors, browsers, and boards, and all these things are coming under response
Yeah.
tools. So I want
Yeah.
to get this information from the village level community and display it in our emergency operations center.
Yeah, so normally what are the problems faced by our stakeholders or the relevant authorities, let's say disaster management center or the stakeholders in case of a disaster when they have to share the resources, maybe not to talk
Yeah,
about sharing, at least to locate the resources, they might be facing a
yeah,
lot of difficulties. Did you take those
yeah.
things into account when you actually worked on this particular area?
Yeah, madam. Last year I worked in emergency operations center in our DMC. So when our directorate asked me to develop some maps, locating the resources where the boats are located, where the tractors are located. So it's very difficult to find out those information because all these are in the manual filing system.
Yeah, entering
So
it manually
nobody
is
is
a bit,
entering.
yeah.
Yeah, that's why I want to build this information management system for the resource management, basically. And one thing is all these contact numbers and other things are also outdated. That means some numbers are not working. So it's difficult to manage such a situation.
So you're going to develop a framework, or like your final output is going to be something like an application, or you're going to develop
Yeah.
a framework for an
Now,
application? What are you going to do?
madam, actually it should be a dashboard. Yeah, that means application.
Application. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, Sampath. Dr. Saranga, do you have any questions for Sampath?
Dr. Roshani. Yes, Sampath, this is very important presentation and it is very good output for the disaster preparedness and for utilized for the disaster emergency response activities. And do you have, you mentioned about some limitations, and do you have any suggestion to develop into some user-friendly system?
Yeah, basically nowadays I am using that open source GIS. So I try to use this smartphone application using open source application. So it will be one good advantage. And one thing is we DMC should create a mechanism to collect the data, because if some disaster happen, when we are asking the data from our ground level, then they are sending something. There is no any proper mechanism. So DMC should prepare proper mechanism to collect the data from the ground level. Then I think these limitation we can minimize.
And also, I think such a mechanism should have a method to update the information as well, isn't it? On timely basis. Otherwise, when the things are not getting updated, also, as you said before, the things will be the same again. Yeah. Is Dr. Sarangasari?
Yes, actually, it's a very important thing mentioned about this presentation. He mentioned about disaster management center should develop the system. Actually, for his resources, we can utilize for the future development of the disaster management center. And do you have any mechanism to share your information to the disaster management center in the future?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, because we are expecting from these kind of things a lot of practical implications. So hopefully he will share them with the disaster management center, isn't it? So are there any questions from the audience for any of our presenters? We got 4 presentations. That is the one that Sampath presented right now is the last one. So are there any questions from the audience for one of these presenters? Any one of these presenters? Okay, then with that, actually, we have come to an end of the 4 presentations within this session. Actually, we had there were 6 presentations scheduled for this particular session, but only 4 presenters turn up. So we had to go with those 4 presentations. So before concluding the session, I would like to summarize along with Dr. Saranga some of the key messages emerged from these presentations and the respective research. The 4 presentations basically touch the aspects and actions related to all the 4 priority areas in the Sendai Framework for Action 2015-2030 within as well as cross sectors at local as well as national level. Namely, the priority 1 is understanding the disaster risk, priority 2 is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, priority 3 is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and priority 4 is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better. So all of these 4 priority areas were touched within this presentation, which is a good thing. Accordingly, there was a good mix of research presented that could promote innovation and inform policy and practice. That is actually one of the main purposes of these kind of conferences. So both of us would like to go by each one of these presentations very briefly, just to give you a brief summary of each of the presentations. So to start off with presentation number 1, which was delivered by Mr. Bandula Wickramarachchi on analysis of shoreline dynamics in spatial and temporal scales at Kalpitiya coastal window, Sri Lanka. Actually, the high-level issue emerged from this presentation was the need for protection of coastal ecosystems. Monitoring a shoreline is important for planning and development in the coastal region, which obviously form part of the Sendai Framework priority area called understanding the disaster risk. So Sri Lanka being a coastal, Sri Lanka being an island, this coastal protection is one of the key important thing for us. So I would like to thank Mr. Bandula for his interesting presentation, and I hope he will continue to work on this area in the future as well. So Dr. Saranga, do you have anything to say about Mr. Bandula's presentation? Any thoughts to share with the audience?
Yes, Dr. Shani, actually you mentioned in last thing about this disaster impact for this research. Actually, as island country, this research is very much important because we have a tsunami and sea surge disaster, and this is application of this Earth observation data. It's also very much important. There are limited researchers available in this field. So his output is much more important for the future coastal disaster risk reduction activities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Saranga. As far as the second presentation is concerned, which was delivered by Dr. Chaturangani Jayakudi on natural versus, sorry, not by her,
Maheshwari,
Miss Maheshwari. Her topic was natural versus man-made disasters, impact of disasters on small-scale, smallholder agricultural systems in gem mining areas in Sri Lanka. The key message derived from this presentation is the importance of being concerned about operations of various sectors, which may have direct and or indirect impact on the frequency and magnitude of occurrence of natural as well as man-made disasters, which ultimately create a multiplier effect on some other sector or sectors. The bad practices, for example, she was mentioning about the bad practices in the gem mining industry, which has maybe the industry has done them intentionally or unintentionally, but they have created harmful effects on social, economic, physical, as well as financial aspects of small scale artisanal agricultural systems. So this particular presentation highlights the need for cross-sectoral collaboration and coordination in managing disasters. Coping strategies, also I hope she will work on the coping strategies as well, how to deal with these whatever the sectors she mentioned, mining, gem mining industry and all. Hope her future research will continue to work on these things as well. And definitely this research has the potential to inform policy and practice in the future. Dr. Saranga, do you have any comments?
Yeah. Yes, I also need to add her presentation because very informative presentation I saw from this session. She studies whole areas and the legal background and the reasons and all the causes of this poverty and this agricultural sector, and she tried to link with this illegal mining and also for her development of this research. And I would like to mention about to add some resilience farming activities to study and add this presentation because that illegal mining also linked with the poverty. This is there will be some reason to doing some illegal mining, and that mining also a very good economical benefits to this poor population. Therefore, it is better to add some mixed farming and this resilience farming also for her research.
So you have to address the root causes of such illegal industrial activities as well. There can be certain other causes which are not directly related to the disasters, man-made or natural disasters, but there are certain root causes which need to be addressed. Then directly or indirectly, our main issue can be resolved. That was the main outcome of Maheshwari's research. Thirdly, we had Dr. Chaturangani Jayakade. She presented on built environment perspective of post-disaster and conflict-induced displacement. The key message emerged from her presentation was that the built environment professionals can play a significant role throughout the disaster management cycle. Although in my view, this has not been effectively addressed in the Sendai Framework for Action 2015-2030, the ignorance of built environment professionals' role in the disaster management cycle could create serious repercussions. The burden of forceful displacement will be ultimately on the shoulder of the built environment professionals. So they are the people, those should finally bring adequate competencies, should have adequate competencies, skills and knowledge for putting up adequate and appropriate housing, sufficient infrastructure, suitable built environment to provide a permanent solution for displaced communities. Of course, Dr. Chaturangani and her co-authors' research has an enormous ability to inform policy and practice in the arena of built environment. Dr. Saranga?
Yes, actually, I also agree with you, Dr. Dashani. And for the Sri Lankan context, for Sri Lanka, we have a long period of time for the rebuilding part and reconstruction because of our limited land and habitals. And some specialists mentioned about these cultural aspects. So Sri Lanka is a multicultural society, and when we are rebuilding and reconstruction into new environment, we want to be considered about these matters. So actually we can expect some good output from her research for the Sri Lankan disaster management, post-disaster management sector.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Saranga. Moving on to the last presentation by Sampath Kuklevitana. His presentation was on assessment of existing disaster resources information and design interactive resources network for effective disaster management. Actually, when I was going through the abstracts, I saw a big, quite similarity, interesting similarity between Sampath's research and our second presenter, not the second presenter, the second presentation in the schedule. Unfortunately, the author was not available today. So actually these two research go hand in hand with each other. So the main concern arising from our Sampath, the last presentation, Sampath's presentation are quite important in establishing a coordinated approach among the institutions and stakeholders responsible for disaster risk reduction, because finding resources, locating resources during disasters as well as immediately after a disaster is a quite important thing, and we all suffer. And this is an area that many people, the relevant stakeholders, are actually suffering. So we of course need an integrated and a holistic approach in every bit of thing being implemented for reducing the risk of disasters. Doing things in isolation would never help achieve the target. So how important the effective and efficient networking, sharing resources and having networks in that regard was quite apparent from Sampath's presentation. Of course, these things can have a lot of practical implications in the future when he develops that particular application. If he can share that with the relevant authorities, they can create a lot of practical implications. So that is also an interesting research. Yes, Dr. Saranga?
Yes, actually we want to be encourage the young researchers, and his presentation will be a fulfillment of the gap of disaster management, emergency operation activities in Sri Lanka. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Saranga. So finally, I would like to thank all the presenters for their tremendous work and mainly for sharing their research findings with the wider community. You did an excellent job, those who presented. Unfortunately, we missed 2 presentations. So my other request, as well as this is a little bit of an advice, you all to actually please try to interact and collaborate with other researchers that have similar and matching research expertise and research interests as same as you. For example, the second presentation in the schedule as well as the final presentation, what we saw from Mr. Sampath, they have a lot of similarities. So if you both can interact with each other, of course, you both will have a long way to go from here. The purpose of these kind of conferences is actually to promote collaboration among academia, research institutions, governmental and non-governmental disaster management authorities, and also to encourage multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral interaction. I think we managed to achieve that within this particular technical session as well, which is good news. And last but not least, I would like to thank Dr. Saranga Vittanage for being my co-chair and your excellent input towards this session. She actually brought the practical sense to this technical session. So thank you very much for that, Dr. Saranga. Do you have anything to say?
Doctor. Yes, Dr. Rashani, thank you very much. And I also happy to work with you. Actually, this is a multi-hazard early warning sector, but in this sector, in the new research aspects, we can identify a lot of areas. They identified the different sensitive areas of the disaster-related activities, and all these are very much interrelated to reducing poverty and the coastal disasters and the new technological approaches. So we can get the information from this research, as well as we can share this information around the global context. And we are happy to work with these sessions.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank all the participants.
Yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, the presenters as well as the audience. Thank you for your participation. So with that, let me announce that the technical session 3A is now over, and herewith you are invited to join the remaining sessions over the next few hours as well as tomorrow. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a good day.
Thank you.